but they only get the hay pellets when they stay in their own space, away from our personal, like they're not mugging, they're not all up on our space. We purposefully and intentionally reinforce or reward these other behaviors that are safe. And the horses are trained to wait for the food to come to them, and they will not be muggy and they will not be all up in your space, but we have to intentionally train them that way. And we've put the time into it, but this is very different from just giving treats. We don't give treats. We use food reinforcers intentionally. Welcome to Season 5 of the Willing Equine podcast, the podcast all about creating positive relationships between horses and people. I'm your host, Adele Shaw, a certified equine behavior consultant, horsemanship mentor, and all-around horse lover. So for an honorable mention on the non-negotiables, I'm a little bit on the fence on this one on whether it's a truly non-negotiable, but I feel like it's very important. For me, it would be incredibly important. But it's not like a species, like it doesn't quite fit into the category with the other ones. It's going to be some flexibility in the nutrition and the diet. For me, being able to board my horses at a facility where I could pre-make their food and have the staff feed them the food that I prepared for them would be very, very critical, very important. I don't feed any grains. I don't feed like a lot of processed things. I feed a very anti-inflammatory forage-based diet. And so I pre-bag or container like little daily supplement things. And then they just have to add it on top of some soaked hay pellets, which I could prepare ahead of time. And then that's their food on top with the hay. So if I were to go somewhere and they were like, well, we only feed, this super commercialized, heavy grain-based feed, and we won't feed anything else, and you can't feed any supplements, that would be a deal breaker for me. But I understand that this type of stuff gets complicated for boarding facilities, because if they have 30 people all feeding something totally different and complicated, that would be really hard for the staff. So perhaps you could try and make it as easy as possible by pre-making everything and making it just like super easy. Just dump it in. I could even be convinced, like if I had to board, to do like a ration balancer or something, and then it didn't have a bunch of supplements. But I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, or any soaked pellets, that's really what it come down to. That would be the harder part of what my diet is. If I needed to move away from the soaked pellets, which I've done in the past, I could definitely do that. But that's a really important thing, is to make sure that you have some freedom when it comes to their diet, and you're not required to feed them something that's going to add to gut problems and add to behavior problems and add to just their overall health suffering. What that looks like for the individual boarding facility and for you is going to vary quite a bit, but that's something to consider as potentially non-negotiable depending on your horse's health situation and what is critical for them. But that's going to be my honorable mention when it comes to the non-negotiables. So moving on, I want to talk about some of the things that you can do to help your horse in a boarding facility where you are having to make compromises, where you are having to make adjustments. So let's say that your horse doesn't get 24/7 turnout and they do have to stall overnight, and that's a little bit of a struggle for them, or maybe they're doing okay, but you want to help them out. There are lots of things that you can do to help your horse be able to cope with limitations like that, less than ideal situations like that. Again, the 24/7 hay is going to really help with this, because they have something to eat on at least while they're in their stall. That can actually help a lot of horses deal with stalling quite a bit. If they can just eat and redirect that attention over there, a lot of times horses will do just fine with being stalled overnight. I'm not saying that that is the best option, as far as like I would love for them not to be stalled overnight, but it happens. And I've had to stall horses overnight for medical stuff. I've had to stall horses overnight, when I'm traveling with them, or, there's different reasons why I might have had to stall a horse overnight. And when one of the major things that I do almost always is, or pretty much every time, unless I can't feed them hay for some medical condition, is the 24/7 hay. Additionally, also enrichment activities can be really beneficial for this. There's a lot of different enrichment activities that you could offer. There's different scent type enrichment activities. There's hay pellet dispensing balls and Kong toys. There's little, like you could get some old Amazon boxes and fill it full of hay and some carrot pieces or something and stuff it inside the box so they could explore through that. There's different lickets and things like that you could use. There's a lot of options for how you could enrich your horse's stall or confined space so that they can have stuff to do that can help them cope with times that they are not turned out. Let's say that your horse is mostly surrounded by companions, but every once in a while their favorite companion leaves and they struggle with that. And so this is one of those limiting parts about a boarding facility where you can't control where the other horses are going and when they're coming and going, and your horse will have to deal with that. Something that I would really encourage you guys to do is to start working with your horses now with separation training. So practicing having the other horse leave and while you're there, if you can, and giving your horse lots of enrichment, seeing if you can do it in small increments too. So having the other horse go a little bit further away and giving your horse lots of nice, enjoyable things, maybe doing a training session with them, with positive reinforcement or giving them an enrichment activity. And before the horse gets stressed out, you bring the other horse back. And then you do that situation in reverse too. You have your horse leave a little bit before the other horse gets stressed and make it all fun and enjoyable for everybody. And then you bring your horse back. And we practice this over and over and over again, gradually increasing the distance and the time that they're separated and until they're comfortable and confident being separated from each other so that one day when the other horse does go to the show or maybe leaves to a different boarding facility or has to go to the arena for a lesson, your horse is able to handle that experience a lot better than if you just never did any practice at all. I think that's really going to be one of the primary ways you're going to be able to help your horse through those difficult situations is preparing ahead of time for them and doing as much practice as you can. You can also, if it catches you guys by surprise and you weren't able to do enough training ahead of time, is offering your horse a lot of very enriching, very enticing things to distract them with during the separation, at least especially in the beginning. It might be really helpful. You could also keep on hand some different types of calming things, things that your horse responds well to. They could contain vitamin B or magnesium or valerian root or chamomile. There's different types of herbs and supplements that can really help support a horse through stressful situations. That could be something that could help your horse through dealing with a companion coming and going. And also it could help in times where you're having to stall your horse. Maybe your horse isn't used to stalling overnight, but you're moving to this new boarding facility and now they're having to stall. Adding stuff like that to their meals and getting it built up into their system and then keeping them on it for a while they adjust to the new routine could be really helpful as well. Another way you can help your horse at a boarding facility where they are very likely to be handled by more than one person, meaning that they may have to be haltered and turned out during the morning and then brought back in the evening, or perhaps somebody needs to go into their stall to clean it while they're still in there. There's a lot of different reasons that somebody else at a boarding facility might interact with your horse, and you don't have total control over who touches them and who interacts with them and when. A way to really help your horse through these things is to do lots of practice and training. Have a friend or family member come out and practice with you ahead of time if you can, or even just as much as you can during, and practice your training. Practice having a stranger walk your horse. Practice having them pet your horse, approaching them and petting them. Practice having somebody go into the stall and cleaning it. You first, and then maybe later on, once your horse is comfortable, having your family member or a friend who's horse savvy go into the stall and clean it while your horse has something nice to do, an enriching activity to do, or while maybe you're tossing food to them as you're cleaning it. So conditioning them to associate these experiences with something good. This can really help so that when a staff member does come into the stall to clean, the horse is comfortable. The horse goes, oh, I know this is a fun, enjoyable thing. Or when a staff member goes to halter your horse, they're trained, they just put their nose right into that halter and they're super easy and they're ready to go and they walk really nicely next to the staff member all the way out to the arena or the turnout. When your horse is able to do these things beautifully and without much fuss about it or making it difficult, even if this said staff member, let's say they are a little bit more heavy-handed or prone to correcting a horse or doing lead rope pops or backing them up or anything that you may not necessarily agree with or want them to do. If your horse is excellently behaved and doing everything just flawlessly, there's going to be no reason for those types of behaviors from the staff member. So this can really help set your horse up for success and reduce the potential for a bad experience to happen if you're putting in the work, if you're doing your homework. And I realize that this is like, of course, well, we'd all love our horses to be very well behaved. But I think a lot of times when we think about training, a lot of times we want to focus on the riding parts. We want to focus on the things that are fun for us to do. And I understand that. But when you're at a boarding facility and your horses are interacting with other people, or even if they're not, even if you have your horses at your home, but one day they may have to go to the vet clinic and stay overnight, we have to put more time and effort into the training for basic handling. We have to put more time and effort into training for little day things that we would never even think about training for, which is like walking into the stall to clean it while the horse is still in there. These things are very, very important for your horse and for the other person that is going to be interacting with your horse. So do put these on your to-do list. Start practicing them every day. Little bit by little bit. You don't have to make a big deal about them. Just do a little bit here, a little bit there, and start practicing and practicing and practicing and getting your horse prepared for these types of interactions and helping improve upon them for other people, but also for your horse. All right. So before we wrap up this episode, because I feel like I could talk a whole nother hour about, preparing our horses for interacting with people and boarding facilities and how to help and management practices at boarding facilities and how we could structure our boarding facilities better to go with a horse's natural behavior, to be more species appropriate and also be less work for people and make the flow better and just less labor and less expense. There's just I have so many ideas about this. I want to talk specifically about using food rewards. So positive reinforcement, clicker training. I mean, you could use scratches, but scratches are a little bit less of a problem, like itching on your horse as a reinforcer than food. A lot of boarding facilities are not very receptive to positive reinforcement type training because of the food that is used. It's often perceived as a very dangerous type of training from old, outdated kind of ideas around feeding horses treats, because one too many people has fed a horse treats and accidentally reinforced really dangerous behaviors, and now it's given it a really bad reputation. And understandably, if we're coming from thinking about it, putting ourselves in their shoes and thinking about the past situations that they've probably run into where somebody was arbitrarily feeding their horse food, treats, and created a horse that was biting or running over the staff members or whatever it is, or they were leaving a bunch of food in the arena and totally messing up the footing or creating a lot of distractions for the other horses. Like when we look at it through their shoes, being in their shoes, like looking at it through their lens, it is understandable, especially since a lot of times when you're managing a bunch of people, you have to make blanket rules. Like one person can ruin it for everybody. And it's not really fair, but it's also just the reality of how life is. And so I can understand. Something that would be really helpful, first of all, is having a conversation up front with the barn staff, the manager, and asking ahead of time whether or not they're comfortable with you feeding food to your horse during training. And we don't really define training like clicker training and positive reinforcement that way. But a lot of times when I say, oh yeah, I use positive reinforcement focused training, they're like, oh yeah, I do too. And that's totally fine. But then you start to bring out the hay pellets and the training pouch, and you're training your horse, and they're like, oh, well, I don't feed treats. I just pat them afterwards, and we don't allow treats around here or whatever, something like that. So you need to be very specific. You need to say, I use food rewards, so hay pellets during training sessions, and I feed my horse these hay pellets for doing the desired behavior. And I'd be happy to demonstrate it for you or show you a video example if that would help. I just want to make sure that you're going to be okay with it, because this is how I train on a day-to-day basis. This is how I work with my horses. So having that upfront conversation is going to be really valuable. And if you have had that conversation, or if maybe the person isn't really understanding, this is where let's say you've had the conversation and they're not understanding, or they say they're okay with it, and then you get in there and then everybody else is a little bit skeptical. So like maybe the barn manager said yes, but the other people are really skeptical. Some things that can really help you out. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and there's a lot of different variables at play, but some things that might really help are making sure that you're always cleaning up after yourself and you're not dropping a bunch of food in the training area, that you are being very respectful of other people's space, and the fact that that food in the arena is probably going to be very distracting to the other horses who may or may not have access to forage all the time, and so are probably looking for food, and especially if they're stressed or having any gut stuff. So being very mindful of that, making sure that you're taking off your training pouch when you're not in an active training session, so we're not causing problems for other people's horses. Making sure that when you talk about your training and when you're demonstrating your training, it's all very structured. It's all very intentional. We're not just walking around feeding other people's horses, and we are explaining to them, especially if they're asking questions or worried, or the barn manager isn't quite sure, and so now you're going to explain it to them. You're explaining that this is very similar to negative reinforcement-based training, which they probably they may or may not understand what that means. So what you could say is pressure and release. So it's very similar to pressure and release type training, where, the pressure is applied, and then when you see what you like, you release. Well, in this type of training, we use something like targeting or some other way to encourage the horse to do the behavior we're looking for. And when we see what we like, we click, which is it's like saying yes or good boy or something like that. And then I offer them these hay pellets, but they only get the hay pellets when they stay in their own space, away from our personal, like they're not mugging, they're not all up on our space. We purposefully and intentionally reinforce or reward these other behaviors that are safe, and the horses are trained to wait for the food to come to them, and they will not be muggy and they will not be all up in your space, but we have to intentionally train them that way, and we've put the time into it. But this is very different from just giving treats. We don't give treats. We use food reinforcers intentionally. And what you could do, what you could tell them is, I'd be happy to show you, I'd be happy to demonstrate, or I've got a video here if you want to see it. And it's totally understandable if you don't want to do it or whatever, but I promise you, your horse, is going to be really good around food. It doesn't bite, won't bite you, won't bite the staff, and won't be begging for, treats. And if there's ever any problem, that you'd be more than happy to hear about it and see if we can come to a resolution, and you're more than happy to work with everybody, that this is just different than what they're used to. That's really what it comes down to, is explaining to them that this is different than what they're used to. This is different than what they've experienced in the past. And it is very structured training. There's a whole approach behind it. There's a lot of science behind it. And you don't need to go into convincing them to use it themselves. You're not trying to educate them on what positive reinforcement is. You're not trying to teach them about operant conditioning and, like all of this stuff. You're not trying to do that. You're just giving them enough information to share with them that this is different than what they're used to, and that it will be safe. And that's all you're trying to do. And if you're really having to convince the boarding, barn manager, or the people around you, and you haven't moved your horse in yet, I would be a little bit cautious, because a lot of times they'll change their mind later, not because of anything you did, but just because once they start seeing you feed food a lot, they may get this like, oh, I can't handle this anymore. And they might start giving you a really hard time, because it really confronts their preconceived ideas, their ideas about this. And they're just thinking, they're flashing back to like little black brownie that back in the day would just bite all the kids that fed him carrots. They're having these flashbacks to potentially very traumatic events. But if you're already moved in and you're already boarding there and you're running into some problems, a good approach might be to hear them out, to hear out their concerns and really acknowledge them, really try and put yourselves in their shoes, and, pay close attention to the things that they are expressing that concerns them. And then see if they will allow you to demonstrate how you would resolve that thing, or what it looks like when you're in a structured training session, or see if you can make some modifications, or ask them questions. Ask them, well, would you feel more comfortable if I did this over here. Like maybe if I trained over here, I'd be more than happy to do that. Just try and be really accommodating for some of their concerns. If you're working with a professional trainer, a mentor, a coach, I would let them know that. Just let them know that you completely understand their concerns. You used to have those concerns too, and you actually used to think that this was a really dangerous way to train, but then you started working with a trainer and learning how to do it right, and you've seen tremendous results from it, and actually your horse used to bite or used to kick or whatever, and now he doesn't anymore because of training this way. And so you're really excited to share it with them if they are interested in learning more. And so you could take that approach too, of sharing your story and sharing how this is a legitimate thing. This is something that we are doing and professionals are doing, and you're learning from a professional, and it's going to be okay. Just to, give you some time to show it to them and allow them to just experience it and kind of let go of some of that old stuff. But, every situation is going to be so different. And I wish I could run through every possible scenario and talk you through, this is what you say to this person. This is what you say to this person. Unfortunately, that's not going to be possible. But I would just do the best you can to be really understanding of where people are coming from and their past experiences, and you don't need to convince them to train this way. You don't need to convince them anything other than that your horse is going to be safe and well behaved, and you're working maybe with a professional if that's something you can say, and that you're more than happy to work with them, and you're more than happy to make some adjustments to help keep everybody happy, that you're not trying to make their life difficult. You're not trying to make this thing, impossible for them and cause problems with the other boarders. You'll try and stay out of their way if they'll, kind of just stay out of your way. And to let you know if there's anything you can do to make that easier. But this is also something I'm really comfortable and confident with. And you're basically saying without saying, I'm doing this, and this is why, and this is how. And I'm happy to make accommodations as much as I can, but also I'm doing this. And so there's confidence there while also being understanding and being compassionate, and also understanding of needing to meet other people's needs and fit in with the overall boarding, not just, all of the people, not just you're on an island and you want everything the way you want it. So there's ways of going about approaching this conversation to help keep everybody talking and discussing and coming up with a solution and problem solving rather than going at each other. And so that's what I would do when it comes to training with positive reinforcement, clicker training in a boarding type situation. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, please do email me at info@thewillingequine.com. If you'd like more information on my courses, coaching, consulting, or even access to free resources, please do check out my website, thewillingequine.com. If you like this podcast or this episode, please do leave feedback on the platform that you listen to it on.